This is a Renegade Media Network podcast.
I got to tell you guys about Zippix nicotine toothpicks. They're flavored toothpicks with nicotine in each one. I want to tell you about them because you might have heard them advertised now on some other podcasts because their name is getting out there. Let me tell you this little fact. This was the first podcast that they ever advertised on, and that is because I actually reached out to them. I already used this product, and I thought I might as well advertise for them. That's how much I like them, and I still use them all the time. They're flavored toothpicks, like I said, with nicotine in each one. Check out the flavors. Peppermint, watermelon, excellent. They've got the old school cinnamon. Remember the cinnamon toothpicks you would have as a kid? This is basically the adult version. They've got sweet whiskey, sweet wood. They've got mocha, spice, island clove. Very, very good as well. So basically, if you're trying to kick a bad habit, maybe go for the cheapest alternative on the market. That would be Zippix toothpicks over at zippixtoothpicks.com. And of course, they want to support this show, and so do you. And if you want to buy some of these toothpicks, that helps this show out. So promo code BUCK at checkout, BUCK, gets you 20% off of your order. That is 20% off when you enter promo code BUCK, BUCK, at zippixtoothpicks.com. Let's get to the show.
You are now listening to the Counterflow Podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram graph. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow Podcast. I'm excited to do this when I've got two people on the show that are very good, and one of them's on here for the first time. Clint from Liberty Lockdown, whose show has exploded over the past few months, is with us, as is my friend Tho Bishop, back on the show. And we're going to hold on. I'll tell you what we're going to talk about in just a second. While we're discussing things here at the top of the show, I keep trying to tell everyone about the YouTube page because my guy Justin, my video guy, is doing so much good work. He puts clips together. He puts the entire episodes together. But back in the day when we were called Death to Tyrants, it was just the still shot. And now with the Counterflow Podcast, all of these interviews, the actual video is up. So even for this one in particular, you can see the handsome faces of Clint from Liberty Lockdown, Tho Bishop, and my not as handsome face. You can see us all on there discussing these things, if that's the way you like to, I hate this word, consume your content. That sounds so salesy, but it's such in our lexicon that now it's part of my vocabulary. So if you like that, go to the YouTube channel. Obviously, you go to YouTube, search Counterflow with Buck Johnson, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff. You will find us there. Also, the website is going strong now. Once again, counterflowpodcast.com. Very, very soon, we will have some brand new t-shirts for this podcast designed by my man Neocon Remover from Twitter. The Twitter King himself is also a great artist. He's actually the one that did the artwork for this show. Speaking of this show, let's get to it. So I've got Clint from Liberty Lockdown and my friend Tho Bishop. You know him from Radio Rothbard and the Redneck Riviera podcast. That's his new project, which I'm enjoying quite a bit. Of course, he's the assistant editor over at Mises.org there for the Mises Institute. And Tho is very, very good at talking strategy. You guys know this already. I was on a panel with him at a Mises Institute event in Alabama. And this is something that I learn when I hear Tho talk. And so I wanted to have him on here because we are talking about strategy. And Clint from Liberty Lockdown, who's, like I said, come out of nowhere very quickly, such an articulate, great voice in the Liberty movement. And he's got a bit of a different take than Tho. And so I wanted to get his take on, for instance, the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and their takeover, possible takeover coming soon of the Libertarian Party, and maybe even the great comedian and wonderful podcaster and messenger of liberty, Dave Smith, running for president on the Libertarian Party ticket. What to think about that? So we bring that up. We talk, like I said, strategy, Libertarian Party or Republican Party. DeSantis, who Tho is obviously, as a Florida man, very happy with. Like I said, Dave Smith, we get into some white pills, some black pills, things that are optimistic out there, like maybe the future of Bitcoin and how that's going to affect things. We get into all of this. I was very honored to have both of these gentlemen on. Let's get to it now. Tho Bishop is back once again, and for the first time, Clint from Liberty Lockdown is here on Counterflow. Clint, first of all, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I'm very, I wanted to meet both of you guys, so this is perfect. I get to double up.
Excellent. And Tho, welcome back to the show, of course.
Hey, one of my favorite shows to be on. Thanks for having me.
So, Clint, we'll start with you because, like I said, this is your first time here on the show, and when I have someone new, I always have to give them a chance to give my audience their background and everything. Your show, Liberty Lockdown, has exploded, it seems like, over the past few months, and I'm sure you hear this, that people say, I see you everywhere now. And for the people in my crowd that are maybe under a rock or something, tell them about yourself and the story of your show.
Sure. Quick background. Second generation libertarian. My dad ran for Congress in the 90s, so I was kind of born into this. Was not interested in politics. I was an entrepreneur, private money mortgage lender, and a broker. Killed it in that field. The lockdowns happened, and as a fiduciary for my investors, I shut down my business, started Liberty Lockdown. I was very disappointed with the messaging of the LP in that moment, so I just wanted to have a voice out there that was really hammering home either the unconstitutional nature of the lockdowns, or at a minimum, just the horror at the tyranny we were experiencing, whether you wanted to use the Constitution as a shield or not. So that's the path I took, and then got lucky enough that Pete Quinones found me, had me on. I debated some neocon. Dave Smith watched it, and then Pete went on Part of the Problem, mentioned it. Dave was like, oh yeah, I love Clint from Liberty Lockdown. And I was like, I didn't even know you knew me. So then I went on Part of the Problem, and the rest is history.
So just for those listening, because I think this makes a very big difference, and we'll get to exactly why, especially relative to Tho, where he's at. You are in California.
For now, yes.
For now. Are there plans to leave?
Yes, very much so. I already sold my house. I am building 6 additional homes, and as soon as those are done and sold, I'll be out of here. So July, most likely.
Wow. Okay. Are you allowed to discuss, or do you care to discuss where you're looking at going?
I'm happy to discuss it. I just don't know. My plan, I'm on Media Row at Freedom Fest in July at Mount Rushmore. And then after that, I plan, if there's fuel, I plan to do an RV trek across the country to any states that have no income tax, see if any of them feel like home, in which case I'll plant my flag, so to speak.
Maybe Tho and I have some competition in trying to win you over to our state, although I would kind of cede ground to Tho because I'm a little jealous of his state of Florida.
Well, plus when you talk about Florida, it's states really, because it's the Panhandle is a whole different thing than the central whole, and then you got South Florida there, which is basically a foreign country. So,
well, speaking of that, where you're at is the Redneck Riviera, yes. and last time I had you on here, I don't believe that the Redneck Riviera podcast had even debuted yet. So catch people up on what you're doing with that show. I love it.
Well, we're still in the experimental phase of it. The goal was trying to create a podcast that wasn't necessarily politically driven. I wasn't trying to, there's a lot of great libertarian podcasts out there, and so we're trying to create a little niche of me and my buddy Ford Sues, the Surfing Violinist. He's a great YouTube channel, and we're trying to just share why we love where we live with other people. And so we're playing around with things right now. We're trying to figure out how to capture some of the true flavors of the Redneck Riviera here. So as soon as we get it right as the product we want to do, we're going to start being a lot more regular, try to promote it more. But gotten some great feedback from yourself and some people that were at the Mises Birmingham event that you were joined me on a panel with. So it's been interesting to see who's been picking that up, and again, got a few tweaks that we're working on, but the feedback has largely been positive. So it's been fun going down that road a little bit.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it so much. One of the episodes recently, you recommended this beer from a microbrewery in your area, and I happened to be, coincidentally enough, at one of my many visits to the liquor store that day, and I'm looking around trying to find it. It turns out I don't believe it is here in Texas yet. So before we get into things, you mentioned, Clint, you made a joke about gasoline a while ago. We're not having an issue here in Texas, and this is so sudden with the news of all of this gas shortage. Tho or Clint, do either of you know what is going on with this?
I know a little bit. Have you specialized in this though? Otherwise, I'll give my best take on it.
I don't do a lot of energy pipelines or economics. I have seen some people that do who I trust in this. Troy Vincent is great on Twitter. I think Troy B. Vincent, he's in that field. And he's a little more optimistic than a lot of other people out there, which is very reassuring to me. I just know here in the Panhandle, our oil comes via barge from Mobile. So we're supposed to be okay. It's not stopping people freaking out there, but we're supposed to be okay. But I know Raleigh, I saw is like nearing like 70% stations completely out. So again, it's gonna be interesting to see how that goes on. But I don't know if you have any more, Clint, on that.
I haven't even checked the California gas stations yet. I filled up 2 days ago, and I work from home. Hardly drive at all, so I'm not much worried about it unless it interferes with my plans for the RV trip. But what I heard was this outfit called Dark Side, I think it was. They are a ransomware operation, and they are holding this pipeline hostage for money. I mean, this is early on mainstream reporting, so I take it with a grain of salt, but that is allegedly what's occurring.
Okay, well, hopefully this gets solved quickly. It seemed at first like an opportunity I'm going against my own advice, but try to educate some people on the term price gouging and putting price ceilings on things and what that does. And I discussed it with a friend last night, and he had a friend that was a far left insane person. And I thought, why do I get into these discussions, even offering advice for this? Because I'm giving a talk this weekend in Oregon on communicating with people, and you just have to write a certain segment of the population off. And sometimes I just get caught up, and I'm like, no, you got to understand, price gouging for one is a stupid term anyway. But all right.
Well, I do think on this, I mean, the vulnerability of like how fragile supply chains can be. I think it's so easy for a lot of people to take for granted the fact that, hey, things pop up in the store. Kind of saw it with COVID. I think that is a larger thing. I mean, we're suffering right now from an economics crisis as much as an economic crisis, just because again how often we take these things for granted is.
Yeah, I think that the big mistake is the central planning aspect of all of these industries, and now that they have what's called, I think it's called just-in-time inventorying systems, where you're trying to get the end product to the consumer right when they need it, and you don't want to have any sort of like overlap. And what happens when you do that is that if you have any supply chain disruption, which we experienced in a very severe way over the past 12 months, 14 months, thanks to the government, you start to see shortages in all sorts of random areas. And I made a thread that went viral back in May of 2020. Warning of exactly this, not fuel per se, but just saying that if you break the supply chain, you won't see it immediately, but you will see these knock-on effects that create really catastrophic supply shortages in different disparate areas that you can't really predict. And sure enough, now we have fucking microchip shortages and fuel shortages and all sorts of stuff. So I think it's a mistake to think that this is all part of some ransomware. I think it's very likely that there are, obviously the government has its hands in it, and then also the lockdowns certainly contributed to some of this.
I saw on some memes early on during the lockdowns that this was the fault of the free market, Clint. So I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes, yeah, it always is.
We kind of this idea for you guys to be on this show together, all three of us here doing something. It came from Adam Patrick from the You're Talking Over Me. And I think he's crazy enough to think that the three of us have some interesting things to say. And so he tagged us, and then next thing you know, we communicated, and here we are. And he was interested. I'm interested. I know Tho loves talking about political strategy. And so I wanted to kind of toss some ideas around between the three of us and see what we have in common, where the differences are. And my audience in particular, I know is very interested in this topic. And I think the best thing to start with is by comparing short-term and long-term visions, because I feel that even when there's debates within our circles on what best strategy is, I kind of think that we have similar goals, possibly, and maybe different ways of reaching them. Tho, I'll let you take this one first, and then we'll get to you, Clint.
Sure.
Yeah, I do think that's one of the interesting that's going on within the kind of the debate sphere right now on the libertarian side about politics, because obviously, I've got some disagreements with, say, Dave Smith's approach with Libertarian Mises Caucus. Something that was out there. And what's interesting is that I think that where in the past a lot of the libertarian debates kind of came fundamentally down to like, what is libertarianism? I mean, now we largely agree. I think that we're not simply trying to act like the relationships between family are the same as market relationships, right? There's appreciation for culture and kind of those natural bonds there. And so I think, perhaps more than other times in the past, I think there's a lot more consensus in the long-term vision of it. But I don't think that we can substitute the long-term for the short-term, particularly in this moment that we're living in right now. Because I think the moment that we have, because political environments change fundamentally. This is obviously something that's reflected in Rothbard's own personal career, with him seeing an opportunity with the left in the 60s and 70s at the peak of the Vietnam War era. You've seen it with Lew Rockwell. Obviously, him and Murray wrote a lot in the 90s trying to do outreach to the right. 9/11 happens in 2001. Shortly thereafter, Lew is writing about right-wing fascism because the entire political environment turned on its head after 9/11 and the complete takeover of the neoconservative wing of the GOP. And now we have, I think, something's resembling going back to that 90s era, and it's kind of for a similar reason. The 90s era was defined by post-Cold War politics, and now, even though obviously we're not to the point where we want it to be, and in this past week, obviously you have the situation going on with Israel, which was bound to pop up before too long anyway. But I think for the most part, the energy in American politics is not in the war on terror. Right? I think both sides, we're not bringing people back necessarily. I mean, maybe Joe Biden follows through in Afghanistan, but we've kind of moved on from the war on terror. And I think now we're entering the next phase, which is the war on domestic terror. And similarly, in the 90s, we saw, that's where I was watching Frasier the other night, and there was a joke about militia groups there. That was the threat in the 90s. And so I think that this particular period is so interesting because you have the use, for lack of a better word, the mainstream right recognizing the danger, or recognizing that Joe Biden doesn't represent them. And so to me, this is just fertile ground for libertarians trying to do rightward outreach. And that's why, of all the times I would ever want Dave Smith to be flirting with the idea of running for LP presidential nomination, and usually be 100% behind that, but now is the last time I'd ever want to see that. And so that's where I'm having fun, kind of sometimes taking some shots on Twitter on this, because I think the opportunity we have right now in the next few years is one of the most fruitful that we've had in a very long time for our cause.
Clint?
Well, I don't really disagree with anything he said there. I think that perhaps the biggest difference is that I'm not sure we have the luxury of a long-term perspective. I think that there's a very high likelihood that we see such a cataclysmic economic collapse via the death of fiat currency globally, as well as this unbelievable debt that we exist under across the world. I mean, it's really breathtaking when you look at it. And I think that my goal in all of this is to sow seeds of fertile ground for some chance at liberty blooming from the ashes of the collapse I see as an inevitability. And that is really my focus. So I think the reason that I am open to Dave running is because I don't personally believe that a Republican president can fix this incredibly sick, twisted system. I think that they could slow it down and buy us a little bit more time, but I don't look at that as a net win for liberty, because I think the collapse is inevitable nonetheless. So my goal is to get someone like Dave, who is a spokesman that talks that liberty shit, as he describes it often, in a way that's so compelling that it changes people's hearts and minds. It creates another kind of Ron Paul revolution version 2, where you get millions of people like me that were brought to the light by Ron and can then continue to propagate this message and grow the movement on the ground, so that hopefully we can create some sort of libertarian civilization in the ashes.
Tho, do you have a follow-up to that? If not, I can jump in with a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think my follow-up would be that, again, for one, I agree that there's not a president that you're going to elect and we're going to solve everything. One of the things that I think that what frustrates me at times with the way that I see this conversation, again, and because to me, the LP debate right now, the takeover, it has a lot to do with trying to make sure that that the right team is in place to make sure that we have that right messaging device for the next presidential election. But the presidential stuff, I think, is a gigantic distraction in all of this. Because to me, like if for example, I think the crypto, I think the economic side and everything that Clint said there, I agree 100%. But so the question is, like, does that mean that there is no way that political power, for lack of a better word, can be used to help prevent, create as many lifeboats as possible? And I think the answer is obviously yes, because we've seen it. In Wyoming, we've seen through Republican action in that state, again, not Libertarian, Republican, they passed some of those profound, progressive, in the right way, crypto legislation in the entire world, thanks to Caitlin Long and state legislators up there. We've seen it in Texas with the gold bank, right? We've seen it in other various 10th Amendment style sort of bills on gold and silver. And things like there are things that state leadership can do to plant those seeds. And the problem is that if we get so fixated about patting ourselves on the back about Libertarian Party takeovers and essentially bringing, basically taking libertarian social media sphere and treating that as political action, I think that is the distraction, because there are these meaningful things to be done beyond, underneath that federal umbrella. And then the question is, what can if we look at the presidential side, even, what does it look like? Can there be meaningful checks on some of the non-state actors? You can't save Washington. There's no way of turning Washington into a non-imperialistic government. But are there ways to use federal power meaningfully against some of those non-state institutions that I think have done so much to promote the cathedral and whatnot? And I think that's true, and that's why I think DeSantis is particularly uniquely interesting character, because of what he's doing at the state level there. That's my frustration, though. This isn't simply about national campaigns. This is about meaningful state action, which is not always sex, or even lower things there still. If you have, because the thing is, imagine this: if you had, let's say, half of all Republican-controlled governments were convinced to start buying Bitcoin, much like Wyoming has allowed Wyoming municipal governments, municipal states to own Bitcoin. There, you instantly have senators of those states, because of that relationship, now become active lobbyists on the federal level, the most powerful lobbyists that exist, on federal level laws dealing with taxation, regulation, securities, the SEC, et cetera, right? And so that's meaningful. Mm-hmm. So if you got those states to do that, then it goes directly to, again, creating those life rafts that can help us protect as many people as possible from the inevitable consequences that we're reeling from a dark age of 20th century politics that's still going on 2 decades after, or 2 decades after. So that's kind of my thought there.
I'm not attempting to downplay the value of political power and state action in particular, and using federal law to try and curb some of the more tyrannical things we've seen over the past year. I think that there is value there. I do think that you are downplaying the result of the Ron Paul moment, and the fact that, in my opinion, I don't believe that you have a Trump presidency. You don't have someone who's actually coming out and calling CNN fake news and doing all of the things that he was very famous for, if it weren't for the fact that it became very popular. And a lot of the people that ended up being Trump supporters were kind of brought to the light in a not obviously not fully, not as much as I would like to see them brought to the light, but to an extent they were brought to the light from Ron Paul's run. When he went up there and he talked, and the anti-war movement that began in the Republican Party, I believe is largely a product of Ron Paul's run. And I think that Trump carried on that. And ultimately, even with Trump, you still didn't see a real diminishment of the warfare state. I mean, you had minor victories here and there, but he didn't end any. So it's like, these are very marginal gains, whereas I see the major gains as a propaganda tool. And I think that it is a mistake to view Dave Smith's attempt to run on the LP ticket as an attempt at actually wielding power. Mm-hmm. It's our belief that we don't have enough people to win. I think that's a correct belief. However, I don't see any better way to get us closer to that point than having another Ron Paul moment. And that's the reason I support his campaign if he chooses to run. I think that that's what we need. We need to wake more people up to these beliefs that we hold. And while I realize I'm saying this while just 10 minutes ago saying I don't think we have enough time, and I understand the conflict there, my belief is that we have to wake up as many people as possible in the limited time we do have so that we can have a chance of having a country that demands liberty back during the collapse, as opposed to demanding a strongman dictator or a communist country moving forward. And that's the concern. But I am not diminishing or saying that we don't want the Republican Party to be as libertarian as possible. Obviously, I want everyone to be as libertarian as possible. I just think that the pure message of libertarianism delivered by someone like Ron Paul or Dave Smith can wake up more people and give us a greater chance at long-term success. That's my belief. Obviously, this is an opinion. I can't know it for a fact, but that's what I think.
I have something then to interject there, because I think I agree with that. And Dave Smith tweeted earlier, and I have it pulled up because it kind of echoes what you're saying. Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012 was by far the most important, impactful, and educational moment for libertarianism in modern history. His run proves that, at the very least, a presidential campaign can be used to spread the most important ideas, and I think that's kind of what you're getting at. I want to tell you guys about the official coffee of the Counterflow podcast, and that is Lorenzotti Coffee over at lorenzotti.coffee. I don't really want to specifically tell you about them because I drink it every morning, because I love it, because it's directly imported from Italy. It's in these vacuum-sealed packs. It's in these beautiful tins that look very good on your kitchen counter. Those aren't really the reasons I want to tell you about them. The real reason is because in this day and age, with all of the insanity going on, I think it's nice to be able to have companies that are very like-minded that we can support. And that's very helpful. Everyone's scared now, like, should I support this company? I don't know. Are they crazy? Well, I can tell you, the guys at lorenzotti.coffee are really good guys. They're like-minded individuals, and they want to support shows like mine that you listen to. So I think if they're willing to give me a cut of the money coming into them from you guys, that should make you want to support them. You like this show, you want to support like-minded companies, well, here's one for you, Lorenzotti Coffee over at LORENZOTTI.coffee. I'll tell you one thing, if you type in promo code BUCK, B-U-C-K, at checkout, you will get 10% off of your order. You'll be supporting a very good company. The coffee is amazing, and it helps me out too. So if you like this show, give it some support. Now back to the show. My question would be, he was a Republican. And so the reason that Dave Smith knows who Ron Paul is because he ran as a Republican, and Dave Smith turned on the TV because it featured a Republican Party presidential nomination debate.
Sure.
And he didn't see, say, Bob Barr in his debate running for the Libertarian Party against whoever, the guy with the moon hat. So
good.
my thought is, does the Libertarian Party allow the platform and infrastructure to get this message out, because I also agree that Dave is a wonderful messenger at the ideas that we all like here. Does the Libertarian Party give him that infrastructure and platform that the Republican Party gave Ron Paul in 08 and 12?
I'll go first on this one. I think it does, simply because the atmosphere in this country has shifted, and libertarianism is now a well-known phenomenon. It still may not be fully understood in a way that I would agree with. However, back when in 08, libertarianism was still very mysterious. My family didn't even know what I was talking about when I would bring it up. And now it's like you can get half of people will casually bring up the fact that I'm a Republican, but I'm libertarian leaning, or I'm a Democrat, but I'm libertarian leaning. Like, people will use this term very easily. It just kind of rolls off the tongue now. It's a very different environment. And secondarily, I think that because of the kind of destruction of mainstream outlets and the popularity and the incredible uptake of secondary markets for media, be it podcasts or social media and things of that nature, we are, and especially since we're not really interested in playing ball with the mainstream anyways, they're going to fucking demonize us no matter what we do. Mm-hmm. I like having a candidate on the LP ticket that has his foot in the door for the biggest platform. I mean, he's got Johnny Carson a call away to come and talk about libertarian ideology whenever he wants, essentially. And if he has the libertarian nomination, I think he will have him on there multiple times. And that's bigger than any TV show you could possibly go on. So we saw the virality that came from his last appearance there. And granted, the media tried to demonize it once again, and he didn't get mentioned very often. But I think that it still wakes a ton of people up. So as to your point about the RNC being where he heard about Ron Paul, I'd be open to having Dave be the Republican candidate for president too. Like,
me too. I wanted to ask you that.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine with me as well. It's just, it doesn't seem feasible. I don't think that the Republican Party is open to the level of truth telling and freedom that we are actually interested in. I'd love to be proven wrong, and Tho can try and change my mind on that. But I see it as, DeSantis is probably the best we can do. And is that a bigger win than having a Ron Paul moment part 2? I'm not sure.
Tho?
Well, I think there's a lot in there, and I think a lot of it I disagree with. Subsidy. Again, I think we agree on larger goals there. I do agree with. I would love to see Dave Smith and if Dave Smith did nothing in his rhetoric, but simply had an R next to him, his name next to him rather than an L, I think that his platform would be even larger right now. I don't think he would have to change anything, and that's kind of one of my frustrations. So that you have very talented, meaningful people, including Clint, that are going to a political party that provides them no value at all. Whereas, so why not make the political party work for you rather than you work for the political party? And that's kind of the problem here. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to suggest that libertarianism was kind of out in the weeds prior to 08. I mean, think about it. I mean, Milton Friedman, like a bona fide, I mean, I've got mentioned this, Milton Friedman neither here. He was a good libertarian, bad economist. He had a majorly respected TV show, right? Free to choose. Like this was a major, particularly at the time, right? Very fewer choices on the dial. He had a major platform. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged was considered the second most important book in America, short of the Bible, right? There was a lot of libertarian, prominence out there. Now, the great thing what Ron Paul did is that Ron Paul brought it much deeper. Right, he started pushing Austrian economics out in platforms that had never been seen before. The anti-war aspect to it. Some of those great edges, the kinds of Rothbardian edges that can separate him from Milton Friedman from time to time. Yeah, it was a great platform. That the problem is that you can go on a Zoomer meme group and mention the word ANCAP, not libertarian, and people know what it is. This is something that Jeff Dice has brought up a lot. This is something Steve Bannon has brought up. That the idea, we are in a fundamentally different age than we were in 2012, which again happened on a Republican stage, because we're saturated. We're so much more saturated in this political environment, and so that's why I think the idea of, again, I love every time Dave Smith is on Joe Rogan. Obviously, it's much watched television. I think Joe Rogan is he's America's newsman at this point, but I think the idea like, oh well, interesting political figure plus Joe Rogan equals modern Great Awakening. If you combine the voter turnout of like Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard, who both had great, very powerful appearances on Joe Rogan's show. The result of that is smaller than what Ron Paul has got. So if you're looking for like, how does this actually measure into political activity? It's not going to lead to power. But again, to Cliff's point, that's not what they're looking for. That's fine. I appreciate that. The problem is that what you're doing is you're attracting, like, there's a very specific person that gets involved in party politics, right? This doesn't happen in a vacuum of people talking about online. It requires people attending functions that change things. And so if the goal, if it's like, oh, okay, well, it'd be great if we could have this plus have the Republican Party move in a more libertarian direction. Well, the problem is that you're competing for the same goods, right? There's a finite number of libertarians that have the social skills to be politically relevant, right?
There's like 10.
That's for sure.
That's not our strength as a movement, right? And so like if we're putting these people away from the GOP and into the LP camp to take over the LP, it's going to be great. I mean, you're going to own those left libertarians. I just don't care. Like, I mean, I'd rather own the libs because the libs actually have political power and the left libertarian, Archie Flowers doesn't. And so that's kind of, again, so this is where my frustration kind of pops in, and why, like, I feel like I'm one of the few people kind of waving this flag, and I'm kind of, because again, I think that these are very real issues that have to be worked out. And the interesting thing is that, again, like even in like New York City, which should be a bad place. Like there's very interesting, like the New York City Young Republican Club, led by Gavin Wax and Vish Burrow, who's now working for Matt Gaetz. They were out there defying the state of New York and the state of New Jersey. I mean, genuine enemies of the state holding events. Mm-hmm. Like that's while Dave Smith's out there saying this is what I want the LP to be. It's like the New York City Republican outlet is doing what you want the LP to do in terms of that big bold messaging, right? And so it's like, again, this is exactly why, like in this moment, I think this is such a great opportunity for us. Do
you not see that the RNC is so deeply corrupt that ultimately anyone that's libertarian that would actually get involved with the party would be subsumed by the corruption in it? I mean,
fuck the NRC. Like, I mean, I don't care. These are the same people that are defending Liz Cheney in January, and guess what? Liz Cheney's gone. Sure. The RNC doesn't control. The RNC doesn't dictate where the Republican Party goes. The RNC never wanted Trump to be the nominee. Every single organ of the conservative movement based in D.C. I mean, remember that big purple National Review article against Trump. And you had David Boaz and all these losers saying, "Oh, well, we're going to stop Donald Trump," because I get like any Republican voter gives a damn what David Boaz and the Cato.
I agree with you. The actual populist movement behind the RNC is much closer to libertarianism, and if I thought they could actually take it over, I would probably get on board. I am of the belief that they will not allow a Trump part 2. I think that they will destroy DeSantis before he gets an opportunity at running on the RNC ticket. That's my belief. Maybe I'm overly skeptical and pessimistic. Do you honestly believe that we can get someone in there that messages in a way that's extremely liberty oriented?
I think Ron DeSantis, I mean, right now, as of today, Ron DeSantis is the favorite. It's either Trump or DeSantis. Right now.
Today, I agree with you. Do you think that 3 years from now, they will not have dragged that dude through the mud, that he's like completely unrunnable?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking to a friend up in New York, northern part of the state, Rocco, my buddy Rocco, and he was meeting with his congressman, who's I think running for governor of New York, and he's not going to win. That's fine. But he messaged me afterwards, like, my word, like this guy's a total squish. He doesn't believe a word he says. Fine, okay. He goes in that meeting talking about how he's going to be the next Ron DeSantis. Every single Republican running for a government, running for governor, is having to act like they're going to be Ron DeSantis. Now, whether they fall through all that secondary, right? Just like when Newt Gingrich and Herman Cain were pandering about the gold standard. Like, I mean, then we're going to act on it, but it shows that that's where they recognize that there's energy here on this field, that they can whip up something on this monetary front, which is interesting. That's what the base wants. The base does not want Liz Cheney. The base does not want Kevin McCarthy. Now the problem is like so like the Kevin McCarthy in Congress, like that's a congressional Republican leadership. That's kind of an isolated void, right? Because you have a bunch of worthless Republican congressmen making that vote. But guess what? They don't decide the primaries, because unlike the LP, the Republican Party, the voters get to choose. And again, they couldn't stop Trump in 2016. They would have done they did everything in their power. I mean, the dossier, the Russiagate dossier, right? The P tape that originated with the RNC, did not start with Clinton, right? And so we've tried this before in 2016. In fact, 2020, when on January 6th, every single all these worst parts of the Republican Party that we're talking about, they thought they were done with Trump. He's like, oh, look at what's happening on cable news. This is horrendous. They're attacking the sacred monument of the Capitol. And you had, I guarantee it, 2/3 of Republicans in Congress thought, oh, well, we're done with that mess anymore. Thank God, because they never liked Trump in the first place. Well, what happened is those Republicans went back to their district, and rather than voters saying, "Are you okay?" the voters said, "Now you know that we're serious." They changed the tone. Now, again, you check Kevin McCarthy's comments January 6th. Check Kevin McCarthy's comments February 6th, right? Night and day. And it's because the people, the base, the base has gotten a little taste of blood. They've gotten used to, they're not tired of winning yet. Because again, these people, they know they won in November of 2020. And now they think the biggest enemy to Trump are Republicans that refuse to stand up for Trump. And so this is the moment. This is it.
Do you think that speaks to Lou Rockwell's quote about the
Trumpers are better than Trump?
Yes.
Yeah.
The voting base that now Trump has kind of allowed to become red-pilled to an extent, at watching what happened to him, almost like a martyr, as odd as that sounds. Do you think that's kind of what helped the voter base get fired up and angry, and people like Tucker Carlson still being such a popular figure on TV?
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets good. What I think is interesting is that, like, you have a lot of people that read like Anatomy of the State, right? Anatomy of the State, one of the a fantastic product of Murray Rothbard, and it's easy to read and say, hey, oh, this is why the state's bad. But if you really, I think that if you really consume the message here, it's okay. Well, the power of the state comes from the perception of the people that the state is legitimate in the first place, and this is how they fool us all. Well, what November 2020 did is it severed that. You have 70% of the Republican base that know in their hearts that the president of America is imposed, is illegitimate, is wrong, that he does not represent the system, right? So we're not having to try to fight this uphill battle, try to convince people that democracy is a bad idea. They know democracy failed them. They know democracy was not secure in 2020. And they know that they're living on an imperialist regime. Like this is a golden opportunity. And I think it's frustrating because, like, we as libertarians, like so often we take, I think, politics way too, like, we apply like a objectivist, not in a Reaganist sense, but like almost like a labor theory of value. Like we look at the object and we try to dictate the value of the object, but subjective theory of value, right? The consumers dictate the value of the object. So again, Trump, you can complain about Trump all you want. What matters is, what do the voters see Trump? And the people that hate Trump basically view him as, an enemy of democracy, a lot of things that could be used to define Ron Paul. Again, Washington Post has this great article. They didn't mean it as a great article, but it was a hit piece. But where did Donald Trump get all his rhetoric? Oh, it was libertarians in the 90s. Like, okay. Yeah. And then, but also it's more about that average conservative red state voter, and also the Hispanic voting population that has no interest in Black Lives Matter, that is not interested in all men and all women, that is, the very interesting culture divide there. They see Trump as the weapon against all of this. And again, in spite of all the things that you can pick in that, and so that's why this flag, that's a wave. This is the icon. It's like the populist battle on the right now. We should be doing everything we can to meme the resurrection of Andrew Jackson, the abolition, the fear of central bankers and state privilege, or else we're going to end up with the national conservatives memeing Teddy Roosevelt as the future of the Republican Party. And I'm a populist, but we need Jacksonian populism, not Roosevelt populism, and that only comes from us with talent and skills and platforms to make this happen. Because if we don't, then the worst parts of the right are going to take that void that we're leaving there for them.
How can you see what you just described about last November with the election and still believe that we can actually get someone in there that will push for liberty? Because my viewpoint is that the only potential that a Republican gets nominated or elected, I should say, and put in power is if he is, at the end of the day, not a friend of liberty. I think that he will be a corporatist, dyed in the wool, statist, big government, big military. Like, I don't see how you actually get, like, say DeSantis is the real deal. If he is the real deal, I don't see him having a chance of ever actually winning the election, even if he wins the election. So, like, what is the value in backing or trying to reform the Republican Party if that's the case, if the system is this corrupt that we are at this point? Because it sounds as if you think it is, but then it sounds as if you think it's fixable. So I'm trying to, like, balance that.
No, it's a fair question. And I because I think the 2020 election in particular is interesting. For one, obviously, the 2020 election was unique just from the nuts and bolts standpoint, right? You had states that have never done vote by mail that were using vote by mail. Everyone acknowledges that vote by mail is a particularly vulnerable, is more vulnerable than showing up, right? At the same time, you have certain states that are changing meaningfully election laws. I mean, Arizona is kind of interesting because of Kelly Ward, who I have a soft spot for, I must admit. They're doing the audit right now. They're going to make tweaks to their process. Pennsylvania, which the state legislature is controlled by Republicans, they've been working on some stuff. Georgia's already made some changes. And so for one, you're going to have a different framework for elections in 2022, 2024 than you had in 2020, which is kind of in the weeds, but I think meaningful. 2 is that people are going to be on their guard more. 3, though, is the beauty of it, is that, again, I was at a Republican Party of Florida meeting. These are the people that are the representatives of the county chapters. And typically, like historically, the people that actually get involved in the recs are more of the, let's say, the Bush sort of mindset than, let's say, the Ron Paul sort of mindset. And we were in a meeting and everyone was talking about, like, yeah, like if the Democrats pass H.R. 1, which is a nationalized election law thing, then the only answer we're going to have is refusing to enforce it or seceding from the union. And so, like, if you have Ron DeSantis out there and in 2024 he loses with the perception of irregularities again, which the thing is, and Republicans have been complaining about this for years. I mean, I remember being in DC in 2012. I mean, a Heritage Foundation was holding events about, here's all these voting irregularities that back to Mitt Romney, right? So this is not something new, kind of even necessarily on the right. So, like, so that's the beauty of it, is that the more that conservative America distrusts the election system, that also kind of pays out dividends. So either, heads, we win if DeSantis is the nominee, right? If we're talking about a 2024 race where it's Mike Pompeo or Tom Cotton versus Kamala Harris, then this conversation goes to right. Then it means that my reading of the landscape is wrong.
So then you'll be on the Dave Smith campaign at that point.
I would vote Dave Smith 2024. But see, here's the problem, though, is that, okay, let's say you have a 3-way race between DeSantis, Dave Smith, and Kamala Harris. I don't like that. I mean, for one, I'll be voting for Ron DeSantis over Dave Smith, which I don't particularly like. I would never want to pass on the opportunity to vote for Dave Smith. But the problem is that all of those people that might be attracted to the LP to vote LP for the first time, those should be DeSantis people. Like, I mean, if we can recognize, and I think there seems to be agreement, and understandably so, that DeSantis is a better than average Republican figure. Yeah. We should embrace a better than average Republican figure, and I'm willing to do so with kind of like the asterisk saying, hey, if DeSantis ends up being thrown out by his own party, then we go to war. Fine, I fully embrace that sort of mindset.
Well, then I think we've kind of come to a little bit of an agreement there. So go ahead.
Well, I got a question, Clint, because I do think that those are valid points. What if, like Tho said, if it's not DeSantis, or I still have this thought that it's going to be Tucker Carlson, we'll see. But if it's some kind of neocon, Tom Cotton, and Nikki Haley type figure, then yeah, this goes by the wayside. What if it's not Dave Smith and the LP, and it's Justin Amash?
That changes a lot for me personally, because I don't view Amash as the revolutionary figure that we need. And I probably would, especially if it was DeSantis versus Amash, I would probably go DeSantis. However, if it was Smith, what I was going to bring up is that Kurt the Libertarian, who's a big account on Twitter, he's a brilliant guy. He's came up with this plan that we should use the LP to shift elections and basically throw our weight, step down from the race, throw our weight behind the candidate that promises us the most libertarian principles or policies moving forward. I think that would be a tremendous game plan for Dave. If he's looking at, say, 7 or 8% of the vote, which I think if you have Kamala Harris running, there's a really decent chance that you could have someone like Dave with all the platforms that he can get on, getting a really record-breaking libertarian turnout. And in the last month, DeSantis comes to him and he says, hey, I can get you, we can end the Fed. And Dave says, I'm stepping down. Like I would be okay with some sort of pragmatic approach. Like I'm not some ride or die person that need I need the Libertarian Party to get 5% and that'll change the world. I'm not a fucking idiot. Like I know that that's not going to change the world and it's not going to save us. However, I think that if you can be a threat, a real genuine threat, you can do both of what we're talking about. You can wake people up because Dave can campaign. He can talk that liberty shit. He can wake people up, and then he can take that momentum and he can use it to attain the political power that Tho is talking about. So I think that's kind of the that to me would be the ideal outcome personally.
I also got to ask this question. This could be for both of you. Dave Smith is, from what I can tell, the biggest libertarian podcaster in the world. And as far as I know, and do you think that the LP offers him anything extra that he doesn't have right now, as far as getting a message out?
I do, because I think it will, especially if he's polling hard, if he's actually getting real traction and he's doing the circuit with all of the biggest podcasts out there, I think that he'll probably be dragged on because he already has relationships with CNN people. He has relationships with Fox News. I think he will be able to bridge the gap to the mainstream media and reach more of the normies because of all of the appeals that he has going on behind him. So I think for that reason, because of the legitimacy, as nonsensical as that sounds, of the Libertarian Party being the formal entity that he is running on, I think it adds some credence to his revolutionary message. And that's my feeling on it, at least.
What are your thoughts on that, Tho?
Well, I'm skeptical of, because the problem is that if you have like a Kamala Harris versus a let's say Ron DeSantis, I'm skeptical because the problem is that you need, in order for the LP to have any sort of traction, even with someone like Dave Smith, you have to have a large percent of the population that is otherwise apathetic about the two outcomes. And I think that the problem is that a Kamala Harris versus, let's even say someone is a lot less interesting than Ron DeSantis. Let's say that it's Tom Scott or something like that, Tim Scott or something like that. I think that this period of polarization is not going to decrease between now and 2024. Particularly, I think that what people don't underestimate is like how popular Trump's going to be in 2024 if the economy's shit, and I think it's a good chance of that. And people are going to have nostalgia glasses because nothing more powerful than member berries, right? And so people remember the good old days of 2019. So that's something I think is deeply dismissed by a lot of other people. And so like that's the problem, though, is that if you're not apathetic, if you don't consider the other two options equally bad, I think that even someone like Dave Smith's going to have a hard time breaking through. But I will say I think that the larger conversation that Clint brought up earlier about these kind of pragmatic sort of horse trading, like I will admit I did not expect much from the person the article you mentioned,
Kurt the Libertarian.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
When I click a link shared by a Libertarian on Twitter, I don't have the highest expectations going in, but that article is great, and it's something that we've discussed, Buck, about, yes. Because I think it's very interesting that the model of, like, say, the conservative party of William H. Buckley, other problems to say, hey, you can trust the CIA on how to impact political power, right? And I think that's and to me, like, this is a much more interesting period of conversation, because once we no longer make the LP about political representation and no longer about smashing the duopoly, but rather about leveraging its unique sort of role. Like, for example, like a Shane Hazel, right? Yes. I wish Shane Hazel would have come out during the period between the general election and the thing, and come up with like a reasonable, like, sort of want Like, hey, if you pardon Assange, I will formally endorse the Republican, right?
Yes.
I wish the LP in 2020, and I also wish that people in Trump's campaign would have been smart enough to go to the LP with this thing. But like, imagine if the LP in 2020 had gone to Trump and said, look, here's 3 people that we want pardoned. If you pardon, let's just say one of them. If you pardon one of these,
Ross, yeah,
we'll endorse you. Right?
Snowden. We all have our own.
Snowden, yeah, I've always thought Snowden would be like a great LP candidate because he could run from exile, true enemy of state, neither here nor there. But it's like, and the problem is you can't go like, hey, I would obviously, I mean, if Ron DeSantis went out there and said in the Fed, I'd get a giant Ron DeSantis back tattoo like tomorrow. Right? That'd be my Florida man ideal. But like even something on the margins, right? Like to me, like if anybody from the Libertarian Party of Florida, I beg you, consider this. The LP of Florida endorses Ron DeSantis in exchange for Tom Woods being in some sort of governor-appointed position for education, in exchange for getting someone in the Saifedean orbit on the cryptocurrency task force to get Florida. You don't need a big change. You can get like a little mid-level position, right? Something the governor has to direct. I think you can deliver this right now. And that is exactly where that sort of guerrilla tactics style in the LP front can be really interesting. It just can't be, you just can't take the LP, you can't make the survival of the LP, the smash to duopoly to be the goal. Because as soon as you make smashing the duopoly the goal, like all the people that are obsessed with like ranked choice voting and all that sort of BS, who cares? If that's the goal, then you're missing then your goal's no longer liberty. It's changing like the party system. And like America has plenty of problems. And I'm not saying the 2-party system's great, but like the 2-party system is not the biggest problem in America. Like we're a fucking empire.
What I think is that if you can get to the point of being a power broker in this way of horse trading, as we described it, you can actually basically break the duopoly, because you then demonstrate that the Libertarian Party wields genuine power. And as that happens over time, you could actually see a point where 20, 30 years from now, the Libertarian Party is taken so seriously that you could actually potentially get someone in genuine power. However, in the interim, I think that it makes perfect sense, and this kind of serves both of our masters here of getting political power and also changing hearts and minds in the meantime. I think it just makes sense. And that's why it bothers me when people poo-poo Dave's run as like, you're fucking up our chances at short-term, slightly more liberty-oriented rulers. And I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think you can actually have both if it's played right. And in the meantime, Dave should run a very serious campaign, and he should try and get as much clout as humanly possible, and he should try and change as many hearts and minds as humanly possible. And then at the end of the day, do what it takes to get us more fucking freedom right then and there. And I think that's really the best of both worlds. So I'll be talking to Dave more, and I hope that he'll consider that. I'm sure he's not going to be able to talk about it openly because the LP would probably be furious. But I think it's pragmatic, and I think it's a reasonable plan.
I want to tell you about your one-stop shop for all things CBD, and they've got a brand new website for you to check out, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. And it's the Paloma Verde store, of course, owned by a great couple, Carlos and Vanessa, out of San Antonio, Texas. Carlos is a very bright young man. I can tell you why. Once you go to the new website, PalomaVerdeCBD.com, you'll realize that he's smart enough to feature the better looking of the two on the brand new website. And you'll see what I mean once you go there. They've got everything you need as far as the world of CBD goes. You can explore their products on the new website page. You can see obviously they've got the tinctures, but they've got mint tinctures, they've got soft gels, they've got CBD gummies, multiple flavors of those, the salve stick, the sleep bundle, which I'm going to have to check out. I've not had the sleep bundle yet, but that sounds enticing to me. The menthol sports cream, I can tell you, works amazingly. I've used that multiple times. And one of the biggest fans I personally know of Paloma Verde CBD products is my French bulldog named Lux. He's about 10 years old now, which in dog years makes him like 70 or something, right? He's old, and he gets around like a little old man with his back legs a little bit slower than they used to be, until we started putting the CBD pet products that they have at Paloma Verde CBD evergreen.com. We put it on his food every morning. They also have these dog treats that we give him. And it's amazing the job that the products have done for Lux, my French bulldog. Now he's trotting around like he's young again. He gets in and out of the doggy door with ease, which is a relief to me, I can tell you that. So, of course, I've got a promo code for you. It is BUCK, B-U-C-K. When you enter BUCK, the promo code at checkout, you get 25% off of all of your orders over $75, which is a bargain. That's over at PalomaVerdeCBD.com, their new website. Promo code BUCK, get you 25% off all orders over $75. Let's get back to the show. Do you think, Clint, that what you said than a Republican candidate that will get you slightly more liberty, are you referencing specifically DeSantis, or are you, okay. Do you think there's
I am. Because I am not gung-ho about a second Trump term in 2024. I don't believe that he delivered us nearly enough in those 4 years for me to be like, he's a huge W. I'd kind of go collapsitarian at that point and just be like, give us Kamala, give us communism, let me go get my gun.
Do you think that comes from the experience of, it's the fish surrounded in water, and the other fish says, the water's warm? And he goes, well, what's water? Being in California, which has essentially been a living hell for the past year, do you maybe Tho's vision of DeSantis is a bit different, seeing that? Oh,
for sure.
He's basically been a free man since April of 2020.
Well, see, that's one thing I'll push back on, because if freedom is still masks being commonplace, I'm skeptical. And from what I've heard, because my dad, who lived very close to me, moved to Florida about 3 months ago after being here as long as I've been here. He says that there's still masks everywhere in Florida, and it drives him crazy. So like there are some. Anyways, point being, yes, I totally agree. My view is very dim because I have been in California and I'm fucking bummed out. Whereas Tho has been in Florida and it hasn't been as bad. So I think that definitely.
And I say that because you said, well, a Republican with just a touch more liberty, and Tho's probably here like, a touch more liberty. Want to compare my life to yours?
Sure.
I'm one of the freest people in the world right now, and I have been for a year. And what's interesting, that the point about the masks in certain parts of Florida, it's interesting, is that goes to the extent to where there's the limits of what state power actually does. Mm-hmm. Because we've never had a mask mandate in the state of Florida. Even beyond that, DeSantis is active, and this I think is I've gone back and forth with Bob Murphy, who there's no intellect in the world I respect more than Bob Murphy. Love him. We've gone back and forth on this because DeSantis have actively declawed what state governments can enforce on masks and other things. Mm-hmm. The issue is a cultural one. It's a cultural one. So again, up here in the Panhandle, we're culturally Southern. We're kind of there was always sort of this backlash against anything in this. You go down to South Florida, it's a totally different area, and kind of sort of Florida depends on where you're at. And so that's all things that you walk around. I can go to a dive bar tonight and nobody in the room will be wearing masks at all. And so that's where things are really, really different here. And the interesting thing about DeSantis as well, though, is that while the mask issue definitely radicalized me it made me far less intolerant of like the LP stuff, because of how significant it was for me, and in the fact 33,000 votes, all the difference between me and living in New York based with Andrew Gillum. It's not just the mask issue, right? If you look at what he's, again, I think that his approach in the big tech thing is a very good approach. It's something that is, I think, resembles in some ways the Jeff Deitz approach, mm-hmm. And the way that he would address it rather than the Section 230 stuff. One of the things that's kind of been overlooked is that there's been a lot of things at the state level on actively ripping out some of the obvious forms of leftist indoctrination. I say obvious there's still some baked in because it's the government school. Like I saw like Eric July, for example. Love Eric July. This is the issue where I am now as Mr. Alex B. Keaton partisan Republicans. Now I've got to take shots at people that I otherwise respect on strategic grounds. But like he made it up tweet the other day. It's like, Look at these foolish Republicans talking about getting kids back in schools, and we should be taking this time this past year. We should have been getting our kids out of schools. Like I agree with that message, but the problem is that for one, people aren't wanting their kids to go to school so they can learn what the government's teaching them. It's simply that it's normality for the kids, right? And there's not an ecosystem built up for this, right? The other side of it, though, is that there's been no more libertarian in the country more effective the past year than Corey DeAngelis. And what does Corey DeAngelis do? He changes the way states fund their
school choice
public education system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, don't tell me that, this past year, total wasted opportunity because the Republican Party was so concerned about getting kids back in schools. Well, guess what? You saw changes across the country on funding kids, not systems, right? And like this is huge. Again, I mean, Corey DeAngelis, I think he's an anarchist. I think he's an anarchist. I didn't know where my mic was there, but like, we had him at the Republican Party of Florida event telling us how we should talk about education. Right? Like, this is huge. And so this is more than just the answer. Like there's so many interesting sort of, again, even like Tucker Carlson. Like, Tucker Carlson is, reincarnated Pat Buchanan. Got to work on the economic side of things, right? I want Tucker Carlson and Lou Rockwell in a room and just talk.
Yes.
Wonderful, magical.
Yes.
But like, the most powerful voice on Fox News is
on
the most powerful
news.
Anti-war guy.
Yes.
And when there's all and while sponsors are stripping their things from Tucker Carlson, Fox News had to double down because he's so popular on the network. He's the only conservative cred they have now. So they got Tucker Carlson Today and all these sort of things, right? Yeah. And so that's why there's so many pieces at it that I think it's so easy because particularly with being in California or Dave Smith in New York City and all that sort of stuff, it's so easy to get like focus on like zero hedge headlines, which are all like always depressing, right? It's so easy to get black pilled. There are real meaningful like substantive things that have happened. But they've only come from one side of the political spectrum, and they've only come from one political party. And like that's why I think we should, we shouldn't say like, but we can just do it better by getting,
Well, and I'm not trying to downplay any of that.
No. So you are. It's just larger conversation.
Yeah, but I would also say that Tucker Carlson isn't just the most anti-war voice on cable news. He is also the most anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine mandates, anti-mask mandates. I mean, he has been very, very good over the past year. So, and then there's obviously lots of positives that have happened. You just got to like try and put yourself in not just your shoes being in Florida, where you've had comparatively much more freedom than the rest of the country, much more freedom than the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. There is a reason for sincere pessimism, given the trajectory of tyranny on the planet. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the reason that I am so open. Like, basically, my philosophy is that we have to do everything. Like this is do or die. And that's why I'm not willing to, and I think you may actually feel the same way, but you want to see everyone put their eggs in the Republican basket of we're going to mold this into something that we can believe in and can do us good. I am too pessimistic about the capacity to actually do that. And as such, I would like to see us not have all of our eggs in one basket when the apocalypse is coming. And I'm like, I want to have an opportunity for a plan C where there has been so much support for Dave's run, per se, and then we can actually push for a genuine secessionary movement in New Hampshire or Florida. That'd be great too. Like I'm open to that. So that's kind of the way I view it, is like, yes, it's great. And there are some positives over the past year, but when you weigh them against the negatives, it doesn't even compare on a global scale. So I'm just like, hey, we got to do everything right now.
Clint, I heard you say on a podcast the other day that it depends on the day you wake up. Sometimes you're black, sometimes you're white pilled. Generally, you seem a touch more black pilled, but do you see some optimistic things as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I am super optimistic about the fact that so many Republicans have been red pilled. Like there are 70 plus million people in this country that now don't trust democracy and they don't trust the media. That is enormous progress I didn't think we could make in my lifetime, much less do it when I'm still in my 30s. Like this is fucking crazy to me. So like, believe me, I'm not a total pessimist, and I'm actually really optimistic about the future of humanity if we don't fall into global totalitarian tyranny. And I believe that with innovation, we can actually have a future that is brighter and more brilliant than anything we could possibly imagine, because we are a brilliant species and we are right on the cusp of really like exponential technological growth that's unstoppable. So like, yes. And that with cryptocurrency on top of it, I am a very big optimist if we can win this battle. This battle though is so dire, and the odds are so stacked against us. It's going to take a lot, and it's going to take some luck too. So I'm just trying to keep my options open on how we go about this. And believe me, I will hone and I will narrow my focus as it gets closer to election time. And I may have to make the pragmatic choice of voting against my Lord and Savior, Dave Smith. Like, I'm not saying I wouldn't. But up until that point, you're damn right. I'm going to be ride or die with Dave. And I'm going to be trying to get as many people to wake up as fast as possible, because I think that's what we need.
You kind of, Tho, I'm going to, of course, give you plenty of time to here as we end this shortly here to give any type of rebuttal you need. But Clint, you're a good podcaster, and I can tell. But I already knew that, but you just walked me into where I wanted to ask. Go with both of you guys really quick. Does Bitcoin offer a massive white pill for our future? Tho, go ahead.
Go for it, Tho.
Yeah, it should. I mean, I think that, for one, I mean, an inflationary environment is horrific, and but what it does is, I mean, again, nothing did more for Austrian economics in the financial crisis of 2008, right? And so there's period when normal people are forced to think about these things. That's good, and Bitcoin is, I think, a very powerful tool in fighting back against the federal regime. And if you take away the ability of the state privilege of money printing, then you defund the regime. Yeah. And so I think this is a great opportunity, and that's precisely why the more that we can help fortify, because the problem is that while Bitcoin doesn't need the state to it doesn't need permission. The problem is that in order for it to be the weapon that we need it to be as widely embraced as possible. And so that's unfortunately where I think some of the regulatory aspects of it really do play in, because a lot of normies, will not go through if they have to jump through, if they have to go to Tor to access Bitcoin, right? If they have to jump through those hoops and can't use convenient apps, it's not going to get there. I think there's a lot more. There's a lot of progress on that to help normalize it. So I do think that's the beauty of it. The regime, I don't think, fully understands and appreciates how important the Fed is to the power. I tell you, most members of Congress don't think about money at all. Instead, working with them in the Financial Services Committee. And so that blind spot is a strength for us, because we know exactly how big that is.
Clint?
I mean, I agree with all of that. And I think that if you're going, it drives me crazy, though, when any problem and I get some dude with laser eyes in my comments saying, Bitcoin solves that. And it's like, yeah, bro, I get it. If Bitcoin was actually the global reserve currency, yes, it would solve it. But there is so much work to be done from here to there. And what I see is that basically the state is lashing out. Like, this is evidence in a weird way of our prevailing. Like, we are winning this fight in a weird way, because it feels fucking awful, because it's like all of my freedom's been taken away because of it. But I think that it's a product of the fact that we have had major victories over the past couple decades. So I'm not a pessimist. Believe me, I'm not. If I was a pessimist, I wouldn't be talking into a microphone 3 or 4 times a week trying to do what I'm doing, because I would have just given up and moved to the woods. I think we have a chance. And I think that crypto plays a role. I think that political activism plays a role. I think that, podcasts and just being honest in your everyday life plays a role. Like, we all need to do our parts. I think that I'm just the purpose of my show is to drive home the urgency of it. It's not enough to just be like, someone else is going to fix this. I don't think some hero, some white knight on a horse is going to come in and just be like, boom, it's 1776, you got your freedoms back. Like, ain't happening. So that's all I'm trying to say is, like, it's not enough to just expect someone to bail you out of this. This is do or die time. It's all hands on deck, full court press. Everybody get the fuck up and go. And I love Tho's perspective. I think that he's thinking about this very deeply. We've had some antagonistic runs on Twitter, and granted, it's probably some of my comments have been too short with you, but I hope now that we've talked, you understand more of my perspective. But I think that there's merit to both sides of this debate. So I'm glad that we got to have it.
Tho Bishop, go ahead.
I just want to go back to, because I do think that you brought up a very important point earlier, and I want to clarify where my perspective might be a little bit different, but actually I think we're in agreement, is that my perspective is not that we need to put all of our cards into, let's say, Savior Ron DeSantis coming in, Pinochet the regime and saving us, right? That's not my perspective. Because I do think that broadly speaking, there is a lot of reasons for optimism beyond political activism for the crypto side. I think there's a lot of stuff going on internationally. I think the Baltic states are something that had to be said about former communist countries take this freedom stuff a lot more seriously than others. Lithuania, very interesting. Estonia is very interesting. Poland. Brazil, good old Bolsonaro's got a mixed bag, but hey, I mean, anytime that you have Minos Marx Mias Mises out there, I'll take it. So there is some strength in South American countries. Technology, innovation, et cetera, all those are great. None of those require the state. I'm all for, again, Sal the algorist. I only have a problem with Sal when he comes in and tries to like punch Paul. It's like, dude, like I understand, like I've got a theater here. Like I don't need you taking a crap in the middle of it because it's a perception game, right? The problem is that my argument is simply that the political aspect is a very small, is a singular battlefield. Okay. And the problem I have is when we take soldiers and instead of equipping them with meaningful weapons, we have them LARP like middle-aged swordsmen. Because guess what? You put them on the front line and they're going to get slaughtered. And that's what I see when we take political talent away from the GOP, a meaningful political party, and we put it in the LP in dealing with conventions and state party. You're not simply saying, hey, we're going to win hearts and minds. You're saying, no, we're going to dictate resources in the political arena to the side project of taking over the LP. And I think that that doesn't work. Like that's sacrificing political resources. And I love Dave Smith going out there and talking about libertarianism on Dave Smith and podcasts and this entire network of alternative media out. That's all fantastic. But don't confuse that for political activism. Political activism is the boring stuff that goes on behind the scenes and that sort of things. And that's where on that political, I don't want to see resources wasted on that particular front. But I favor if you're an agorist and you want nothing to do with the political process, fine. Just don't engage in the political process and be intentionally bad at it. That's what I see. Absolutely,
I can see that. I can see that argument. I think that the people I'm trying to reach and get involved in, as you described it, not political activism, but I would still describe it to some extent political activism, is that people like me I'm not a Republican, and I simply don't believe enough in that party to get up off the couch and go to conventions and meet people and try and motivate or change hearts and minds in that way. However, there are thousands of people like me that saw the Mises Caucus rise up talking serious liberty, and they got me to get going, to actually go out there and get involved. And I think that there's value in that. And I don't think that it's reasonable to expect very hardcore principled libertarian /ANCAPs that are like, I don't even want to be involved in politics. I am that guy. I don't want to be involved in politics. I fucking hate this shit. But, if I'm going to get involved and try and make a difference, it has to be something that I feel in my soul. And I don't feel in my soul going to the Republican National Convention the way I do going and seeing Thaddeus Russell and Hotep Jesus talk on Friday night in Visalia. So it's like, I think that there's value and we can go both ways. I think that the real moment of truth will be when it gets down to the wire. And do you actually split those troops? Because in terms of votes, because the troops are split regardless. You're not gonna have a unified front because most of these people don't even want to be voting, much less be involved in politics at all. So I think that if you can get those people off the sidelines, you're not actually losing anything because they wouldn't have been involved in the RNC stuff this whole time regardless. So that I think the only way you can get them involved is if you bring in someone who is a genuine libertarian like Dave Smith. If you were to get Dave involved in the Republican Party, yeah, of course, I would rock with that. But Ron DeSantis isn't going to do it for me. Like, even though he's better than any of the mainstream candidates, he's not going to get me to actually go and participate. So I don't know if any of that makes sense, but
yeah. What about had there been a Mises Caucus and a Dave Smith work their way up through their RNC, Republican Party, so to speak? It'd be interesting. I've always thought about that. I got to respect y'all's time. And Tho, you were working on a project that I am so excited about because you and I share a love for 90s Rothbard, as it's demonized sometimes by blue-pilled libertarians. But talk about what you're doing and what we can expect.
Yes. So what I'm trying to, I've been creating a site because the problem is a lot of the old Rothbard Rockwell reports, you can only kind of find it on oons.com, like a lot of the content. The Mises Institute has published a lot of it, and Irrepressible Rothbard and others, LouRockwell.com has published a lot of it. But the paleo stuff, a lot of it has not been published. And so I'm creating a side site with my buddy Mike Coombs, who's done a lot of great work and helped me get HTML versions of all of this. And so we are going to be creating a site. I got the blessing of Lou, which meant a great deal. And so I'm going to be creating a side site as an archive for all of that, because it is a fascinating period of political history. And there's so much good content. Again, you read Murray or Lou in the 90s and the issues that they're highlighting. You can read it in Tucker Carlson's voice. Yes. But of course, instead of railing about vulture capitalism and simply ending there, it goes to the next those important steps forward, the Fed and things like that, right? And so I'm trying to going to create a side site for that, because again, trying to fuel this larger project of trying to get more libertarians engaging with the right in a meaningful way. Because my dream project, I want nothing more than, perhaps not Ron DeSantis, but Dave Smith and Matt Gaetz on the same stage. I don't know if you've ever seen Matt Gaetz talk about like his vision of Republican politics, but like that is even more so than Ron DeSantis. It excites me, particularly now as going after this interesting campaign the deep state's throwing at him on the way that they're framing some of the stuff that's coming out. Like Matt Gaetz is sort of a change act that's interesting.
Clint's like, that's what I'm talking about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. But if you get anyone in the Republican Party that's actually going to do what we need, they're going to throw sex scandals at him and stuff like that. And I think it's only a matter of time before DeSantis gets the same treatment. So, well, the cool thing is, if I survive the next couple of years and I don't get no-knock rated, we'll get to find out who's right here. So this will be fun.
And you might be in the same state. We'll see.
Also, exactly. We might be neighbors.
Yeah. So plug away anything you want, what you do for the website or any of the podcasts.
Yeah, it's still at Mises.org. I have an article later this week. We've been kind of taking a pause on Radio Rothbard. Ryan's had some scheduling issues, but we'll be starting that back up. If you follow me at Twitter at Tho Bishop, I'll be promoting some Redneck Riviera stuff until we get that kind of flowing in a normal rhythm. And again, and be on the lookout for, I'm not quite sure what we're going to call it. I've got RothbardRockwellReport.com and also RothbardRepublicanReport.com, which is a little sacrilegious, but I think Rothbard would appreciate it for my larger strategy there. So both will probably end up linking there by the end of it. But that's something I'm just kind of excited about coming up down the pipe.
All right, Clint, your turn to plug anything you'd like.
Sure. I'm at Liberty Lockpod on Twitter, and I am Liberty Lockdown on Instagram, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, Odyssey, everywhere else. So check me out. Give me a follow. I think you'll like what you find.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much. This has been awesome, and I think it will get some fired up feedback. So Clint from Liberty Lockdown, Tho Bishop from Redneck Riviera podcast, and my favorite Radio Rothbard. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for the time.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this chat. I have this small feeling I'm going to get some feedback on this episode. Please do. If it's negative, positive, neutral, whatever you think about the things we discussed here, let me know. And this is going to be, it's early here. It's 2021. This will be a topic I feel that will be revisited many times, probably not just on my show, but on many of the shows in our circles. So I think it's going to be fun. Like I said at the beginning, the YouTube page is up and running. Subscribe if that's how you like watching podcasts. And the Telegram app. You guys have been joining a lot lately. Y'all are flocking to the Telegram app. It's Counterflow with Buck Johnson. That's our room. Join us in there. It's a lot of fun, a lot of good articles, some good back and forth conversation. There's a lot of brilliant people in there. And I learn from you guys in that room constantly, probably daily. So if you're not in that room with us, join us, please. And the website again, counterflowpodcast.com, where we will soon have new t-shirts. And until next week, you guys have an excellent week. See ya.
You get split in fucking half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.
This has been the Counterflow Podcast, a part of the Renegade Media Network.